Hey, my name's Tom, aka ELPHNT. I'm here today at DBS, and we're going to be looking at some of the new features in Ableton Live 12. So I'm going to start just with like a really basic pattern here. Cool, something super simple. Now, I want to come up with an interesting kick pattern. I could obviously program in some notes here, but I don't really have an idea of a particular kind of pattern that I wanted to create. And one of the sort of major new features in Live 12 is this thing called MIDI Tools. MIDI Tools help you generate and transform MIDI data, and they're really useful for coming up with ideas or taking ideas that you've got and transforming them in different ways to find new ideas. So you'll notice in the MIDI editor over on the left-hand side here, I've got these two tabs, Generate and Transform. We'll focus on Generate for now because I'm going to create some parts. And the way these work is there's a number of different kinds of generators that are tailored towards creating different kinds of material. And we'll see sort of a couple of these as we go through and create different parts. But the one I'm interested in now is called Rhythm. So each generator kind of works in its own particular way. Rhythm generates rhythmic patterns for particular notes. So for example, I can choose the note that I want to generate something for, let's say the kick drum. And then I have various parameters here that define the notes that get generated. So for example, if I set this to 16th notes, oh, what happened there? That moved my rim. Just going to go back there. Cool. 16th notes is the duration of my steps, and how many steps do I want to create? And what you'll notice is as soon as I start adjusting these, MIDI notes appear in my clip. There's kind of two ways you can work with these generators. Either they can be operating in real time, where as you're making changes, the notes are changing. And that's with this generate on. If I leave that off, nothing's happening as I change the controls, and I can hit this button to generate some notes. But I'm going to do this, I'll do this in the real-time way, where I can kind of adjust stuff. And I'll just do it while the clip is playing. And you'll see how I can cycle through like various different rhythmic patterns just to sort of get some ideas. So I can set things like, how many steps do I want to fill this pattern? So I want this pattern to be 16 steps long, let's say. And in those 16 steps, I want to have 6 kick drums. And then I've got this pattern control, which I can cycle through a bunch of different variations. So that's kind of cool. It's a kick drum pattern that maybe I wouldn't have programmed in particular. So that sort of works pretty interestingly. Let's do something kind of interesting with these hi-hats as well. Another new MIDI tool that we have access to in the piano roll lets us transform sort of existing notes. So if I've got these hi-hat patterns, I can hold down Alt and E, and you'll see I get this sort of different cursor. And I can click and drag up or down on a note to split that note into different divisions. So this is really cool for creating interesting rhythmic patterns really quickly. So if I just want, hold on, sorry, Alt-E, there, or maybe I want a really kind of fast roll. I'm actually going to turn the tempo down a bit. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this one a bit longer and divide this into like a whole bunch of notes. And that's kind of cool. It's an interesting little hi-hat roll there, but I want to make it even more interesting. So I'm going to go over to the transform tools. So generate creates new MIDI notes. Transform tools take existing MIDI notes and do various things to them. And again, you'll see there's a number of different ones here that you can work with. I want to use one called Time Warp. Time Warp takes a selection of notes and stretches their time in interesting ways. So at the moment, all of these hi-hat notes are equal lengths. But with Time Warp, I can sort of accelerate or decelerate the notes. You can hear how it sort of slows down, creates this kind of interesting rhythmic sort of roll pattern. So it's really cool for just kind of quickly creating interesting rhythmic patterns. Let's actually add a snare into this as well. I also want to make this beat a little bit less repetitive. It's just the same beat over and over again. So I'm going to add in a couple additional notes. Let's add in some extra kick drums here. But I'll select those kick drums, those new ones that I've just added. And you might be familiar, because this has existed in live for a little while, with note chants, where you can set the probability that a particular note is going to play. So by default, everything's on 100%. It's always going to play. But these kick drums that I've selected here, I don't want them to play every time. So I can open up the note chants here, which you'll see it's had a sort of slight redesign to the way it looks. But it functions mostly the same. And I can pull down the chants for these notes. So let's go like around 60%. So you'll see on those kick drums, they get a little sort of triangle that lets me know it's got some chants. They're only going to play every so often. So maybe take it down to 50% so you can really exaggerate that. They seem to be playing quite a lot for the 50% chance. But you'll notice every now and then it kind of leaves those notes out. Maybe I'll even do that for the hi-hats as well. Select all these hi-hats and pull them down to like 90%. So just every now and then it's going to kind of leave out a hi-hat. But what you might hear kind of, so it's leaving out some notes every now and then. But what can sound a little bit weird is in these rolls, if it kind of leaves out the first hi-hat but plays the second hi-hat, the timing can sound a bit jittery. What I want to have happen is either I want the entire roll to play or not, nothing plays in that particular part. So what's new in Live 12 with this note chants that we can do is you can create what's called note groups. So before, every single individual note had its own chants, and there was no way to kind of link them together. But what I can do is I can select, say, this whole hi-hat roll here. And if I right-click on that, you'll see this option to group notes, or Command-G. And now, it's very subtle, but you'll notice that instead of a little circle, I now have this sort of diamond across all of those notes. And I can define a chance for that whole group of notes to play. So either they're all going to play, or none of them are going to play. So I'll turn it down like quite low. The chance today is just really wanting to play notes. I'll do it with these ones as well. And just kind of group them together. So Command-G. There we go. So it's kind of every now and then it's sort of leaving out that roll. So some really interesting things you can do with that. Like another example might be maybe I want to add a drum fill so that at the end of this loop there's going to be a fill that plays, but I don't want the fill to play every time. So I'll program in something like this. But I'll select that whole group, press Command-G, groups those notes together. And now that fill's just going to play every once in a while. So we're going to have this loop just kind of playing as we build some stuff on top of it. So I want to make it a bit interesting, so it's not just going to be the same every time. Maybe I'll even add in a couple extra little rim shots here, and I'll pull the chance of those down as well. So just every now and then, just going to add something interesting in there. Cool. So I'll go back into this clip, and we can take a look at some of the other generators that exist, these MIDI generators. So I've got nothing in this clip at the moment. I've set it to be in the key of C minor. And these generators and transformers work with your key information as well. So when I'm generating notes, chords, things like that, it's going to follow along with whatever key I have set. So let's actually just play this clip. I'll turn that down a little bit. And so while this clip is playing, I can generate some notes. I'll go over to the next generator, which is called seed. So the way seed works is you can set a range of pitches, a range of note durations, a range of velocities, the number of simultaneous notes you want to have play, and the density of those notes. And it's going to generate melodies for me. So I'm going to say I want to create a melody. So I'm going to only have one voice. I want it to be kind of between C3 and C5 is pretty good. I'll set it to be between 16th notes and 8th notes. and yeah, kind of a little bit more dense than that. Maybe let's turn this down a bit. The C5 is a bit high. Let's go down. It's a bit dense as well. So it's generated a melody for me. If I don't like it, I just hit this button. Generates another one. If I want to generate a longer melody, I set my bar as long as I want it to be. Let's do 2 bars and hit generate again. And you can just keep doing that until you find something that you like. And of course, this is all just MIDI information, so you can get something that's kind of close to what you like and then go in and refine it a bit. So the idea with these generators is they're not just going to instantly come up with an idea for you, but they're going to help you discover new ideas that you might not otherwise think to come up with, or just kind of help jostle your creativity when you're stuck and you just need a bit of a boost. So the range is a bit wide. Let's sort of restrict that a little bit. And maybe make it a little less dense. So we've just got a little bit of a melody. It's also really good for bass lines. If I just sort of quickly load up a different sound here. Let's get a basic bass sound going. And again, I'll just use seed, pretty much kind of roughly the same settings, hit generate. I'll probably want to set the notes to be a bit lower. It's kind of just try some variations. So let's use that for now, because I also want to show you another transform tool. Let's say I've got this note here. I'm going to pull that back a little bit. See, let's double the length of this as well. So I've got this pattern. I want to make it a bit more interesting. I'll duplicate it. And then I can select the second half of this, go over to my transform tools. I'm going to choose one called Recombine. Recombine lets me take existing notes and just kind of shuffle them around in interesting ways. So just by dragging this here, you can see how it shuffles those notes. Extend it to be a 2-bar bass line. Maybe these 2 notes here are pretty far apart. Maybe I want to create something that sort of moves between those 2 notes. I can select those 2 notes and go over to the Connect transform tool. And what that does is that fills the space between those notes with some additional notes. I can select the sort of timing of those notes. Do I want to have ties involved? Fills the space. What you might have noticed is with both the transformations and generations, there's a max for live section. So where this sort of really kind of blows the lid off is there are a handful of generators and transformers that come built in to Ableton. But if you know anything about Max for Live is this environment that lets anyone develop content for Ableton. These generators are open to Max for Live. So what that means is we're going to start to see, and we've already seen some third-party developers create these tools that generate notes directly in the piano roll. And there's like already some pretty nuts Max devices that people build. So I can't wait to see what people are going to build for these. But so obviously Max for Live is only available in Live Suite. So any Max for Live generators will only be in Live Suite. I think if you are somebody who's got like incredible music theory knowledge, you know how to play keyboard, a lot of these MIDI tools, particularly probably more so the transform tools, are really interesting in terms of just kind of like getting you out of your habitual sort of thinking of creation. I know for myself, I tend to sit down, always play the same chord types, the same kinds of melodies. So if I can take those, play them in, and then use some of those transform tools to like, let's see where I can make them slightly different. That's sort of quite useful. And then obviously for beginners who maybe don't have any music theory knowledge, to be able to hit a button and everything works in key is really good. But what I find, and Ableton is always very good about this, I think they obviously do think a lot about these things on a philosophical level, is these MIDI tools aren't the kind of thing where you like hit a button and it's done the thing for you. You do still have to have a bit of an idea of how to compose and what sounds good, what works well together. It's not just going to give you a thing that sounds good. So I've found for myself, because I'm not particularly strong at music theory, like something like this generator called Stacks is the chord generator. Let's see if we play the sound. This is a good, it's maybe not a good sound for it because it's a bass. Oh, it should work. Cool. So Stacks, you can set up to 4 different kinds of chords, and you can change the chord shape. And you'll notice though, and this is going to relate to another feature which I want to mention, is it doesn't give you sort of chord types here. It gives you these kind of little diagrams. But you'll see down in the bottom, it actually does tell you what the chord is in this sort of bottom bar. If I hover over there, it says C minor 7, scale degree 1, 3, 5, 7, etc. I've found this personally quite useful for like discovering how chords work, because I'm not.
Also, it's just like you're looking at it in a different way. Almost in the future, I can imagine people won't refer to it as an inversion or think about it like that. They'll just move the slider.
Yeah, exactly. I think it just sort of creates this different way of thinking about the way notes combine together, the way chords work. I think if anything, it's going to help people more easily get attuned with these more advanced music theory concepts. They're more like helpers than I'm going to do the job for you kind of thing. If let's just get a sort of basic drum beat in here. Just capture that in. Because, so, hide the mixer. You might have been familiar with in the past, so Command-U is the shortcut for Quantize. So if I select all of these notes, I press Command-U, snaps it to the grid. Previously, if you pressed Command-Shift-U, you would get the Quantize settings, which lets you set things like quantize amount. So if you don't want to quantize it exactly to the grid, you could say 50%. But the way that works is you'd have to sort of, you'd go 50%, apply it, it's too much, undo, do 40%, apply it. Now, if you hit Command-Shift-U, it actually takes you to a transform tool, which is Quantize. And that lets you apply this quantization in real time. So as that's playing, you can just dial in exactly how much. So you're like, that's a bit too loose. Just dial it in and just kind of listen. And you can set, do you want the end of the note, the start of the note, both. Super cool.
They don't have that for audio, I assume.
No, that's just a MIDI transform. But yeah, really, really cool feature, especially if you sort of like playing beats that kind of have a bit of a human feel, but you want to just quantize them a little bit. Very cool. Also, Humanise. So if this was fully quantized, if I sequenced it, we don't need that. You can just humanize the notes. Again, just like dial in how kind of wonky or not wonky do you want it, which is pretty fun. So that's a new thing, is the Humanise.
Does that override the groove pool?
So no, it'll apply the grooves, because the way the grooves work is it is always applied on top. So like if I had notes here, grooves do get applied on top of that. There's probably some kind of complex math happening as to how exactly it shifts it. But you can apply, before you could do, the way you would sort of do this kind of real-time quantization is actually using grooves, is if you load up a groove, any groove, and you turn the timing off, you can quantize there, and you could kind of listen to it and hear how much it was quantizing. But you couldn't see the notes moving. And then the timing of the groove would be applied on top of that. So yeah, it's not going to mess with the groove pool stuff at all. There's a bunch of other really cool MIDI transform tools like Strum. I know Strum is a big one that people love, that lets you kind of strum chords. So like if I plug in some stacks, Let's just do that. There we go. And stop. I select those, and let's go to Strum. Super cool. We just, you can sort of adjust that.
Is that a new one?
The MIDI Tools.
Oh,
yeah, this is just part of the MIDI Tools, the new MIDI Tools. So Arpeggiate as well. Arpeggiate's pretty cool. So like I can take chords. Let's just quantize those back to there, and just like real-time arpeggiate the notes. Which is pretty fun.
The seeds in the new MIDI devices, are they like written by humans, or is it, because at least temporally it seems very pleasing? So.
You mean this generator seed? It's actually just completely random. So there's something in the background that when you hit this, it generates this some kind of random seed that generates notes but restricts them within these parameters. So there's no like predefined patterns that are being chosen from. Even with like this rhythm, it's all algorithmic. There's no like pre-written stuff in there. It's all being generated kind of semi-randomly.